The Ukrainians will certainly not withdraw their troops from the Donbass without getting it something significant in return. And what Zelensky seems to be determined to get, and what he's been promised by European partners, is some kind of troop presence in Western Ukraine, and some military guarantees in exchange for that. Because I think the Ukrainians know full well that it won't end with, even if they surrender the Donbass, it wouldn't end there. It would be the Donbass being a launch pad for attacking other Ukrainian regions. So they're going to need something significant in order to give it up. I think, a lot of the soldiers who've been fighting in the Donbass since 2014 will not want to give it up and might even refuse to go back, the volunteer battalions. And Russia is not going to accept any kind of peacekeeping force from Western countries in the region. So it seems like it's still a very difficult thing
Can I
to
just
solve.
ask you something that someone was telling me only today? Some of the talk, the chatter they were saying was coming out of Kyiv was that President Putin, he wants his victory parade in Kramatorsk, and then he might settle and stop the fighting, bide his time, build relations with the Trump administration for the next few years in order to perhaps resume again at a later stage. Have you heard anything along those lines, or is that just chitter-chatter rumour at the moment?
I tend to think that wouldn't happen, because I don't think Putin is a man with a lot of time for the ambitions that he has. I mean, I think he waited 10 years of kind of this hybrid invasion in the Donbass to see if he could get it. It wasn't working. And he feels like he's an older guy that's running out of time, and he wants to achieve his Tsarist ambitions before he goes. So even if he waits a kind of 6 months or a year, he's still going to come back, I think, and try and subjugate Ukraine completely.
I think so too, then.
Oh, very, very much so. Putin thinks he's winning militarily at the moment, and he hasn't changed his stance one jot when it comes to the peace negotiations.
Let's just now finally look back at the entirety of the year. Are there any events or moments for you, Maxim, that you can look at and try and get an idea from those events what 2026 is going to look like?
Yeah, I think, the Ukrainians have seen what the Trump administration is interested in and what they're focused on, and is going to have to continue to try and play this peace game just to keep the Americans interested in this war. Because the danger is that Trump walks away entirely, and things like the purchase agreements where Europe can buy American weapons might just evaporate, intelligence sharing would stop. So they don't want the Americans to walk away completely, and they're going to have to try really hard to keep these negotiations going, even if they don't believe that it's going to come to anything. And that's one of the kind of the bizarre features that we've seen this year, and I expect that to continue next year. I think that we'll continue seeing incremental Russian advances. There will still be big problems with mobilization, and something I wrote about in my last piece was the rate of desertions now in Ukraine is very, very alarming, and the Ukrainian government is going to have to do something to tackle those desertions, increase punishments, cut people off from social security and benefits and other things, in order to keep the war going. I mean, they've also had this outflux of young men, 22 to 24, who were allowed to leave the country, and leading to the Germans complaining about them. So they're also going to have to do something about that. And they're going to need, I think, more operations like Spider's Web, more operations in the Black Sea, things that can lift Ukrainian spirits, particular moments. I think Kupiansk has done that a little bit for now. It's inspiring to see that the Ukrainians can completely surround the Russians once they claim to have taken a town. But it's difficult to see going into winter what the next technological breakthrough will be, because those are the things that have really made an important difference. I think the use of AI is going to be a theme of next year. We've already seen some artificial intelligence on the battlefield, and the person who can use AI effectively without causing kind of friendly fire incidents and at scale is probably going to have the upper hand next year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Putin's coming under increasing pressure from himself and others. But the one statistic that he hates being quoted at him is, if you compare his advances in Ukraine since the start of the war in 2022 to what the Russians did during the Second World War, and we're almost at exactly the same length of time. In the Second World War, the Russians pushed the Germans back from just outside Moscow to just outside Berlin. They've advanced about 40 or 50 kilometers in the same time inside Ukraine. That is a measure of the success of that Ukraine has had as a much smaller military, a much smaller nation in holding back the might of the Russians the whole way through. Next year, we're going to see an increasing number of audacious attacks like Operation Spider's Web. The Ukrainians are going to attack the operational level, Russia's ability to continue to fund the war more, and attack those targets on a global basis, as we've seen with the Shadow Fleet attacks.
Maxim, in August as well, when the Russian fuel shortages tipped into a crisis for the Kremlin after the intensification of Ukrainian drone strikes. And you wrote about the Ukrainian drone battalions wiping out oil refineries multiple times this year. Can you just take us through how you've seen Ukraine's long-range air campaign evolve during the year?
Yeah, it's fascinating because there was a capability that we didn't think Ukraine really had, was to strike back at the Russians deep in the rear in the way that the Russians were using kind of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles at the Ukrainians. And they developed this drone program with actually several different manufacturers and a lot of support from the West actually in developing these long-range drones. I went on a mission where we saw these Luti drones being launched, and they flew all the way across the Black Sea, and then they hit the port of Tuapse and hit oil refinery infrastructure there. And it was a very interesting way to see that the way that special forces operations, these guys that were running this were all special forces operators who'd moved into the drone business. It was a very organized, very precise thing based on a lot of intelligence, a lot of Western intelligence sharing to identify where the Russians' defenses were and how the Ukrainians could maneuver their aircraft, and they would also use decoys. And it was a combined attack, often, with HIMARS or ATACMS missiles. Storm Shadows as well were involved. So there was a big, overwhelming attack of the kind that the Russians had already been launching on Ukraine for a couple of years. So it was fascinating to meet the guys behind this and to hear about their collaboration, their cooperation with Western intelligence. And see how effective they could be. These are not sophisticated aircraft, really. They are wings with a propeller and a bomb attached, but guided by satellite using GPS. And the Ukrainians have been able to scale this up because of that, and significantly now start to I think they've attacked almost all of Russia's oil refineries at least once, and some of them several times. They're now hitting port infrastructure, Novorossiysk, again and again and again. And it seems to be something the Russians are really struggling to deal with.
But matched by Russian strikes on Ukraine's infrastructure, energy infrastructure, repeatedly throughout the year.
Yeah, the Russians have continued to hit the energy infrastructure that's supporting the Ukrainian civilians. They've still got this idea that they can break the will of the Ukrainians by freezing them during the winter. The Ukrainians are attacking Russia's ability to continue to fund the war. So slightly different target sets or rationale behind why they're hitting them.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.